Hello YouTube. Today we have iPhone 11 Pro. Did I turn this off? 11 Pro Max. This particular device, I believe, was thrown at a wall, and the casing is split, the housing is split, so you can't redo, you can't just fix the back glass because it's bent right there. The OLED is damaged, lines bleeding, touchscreen is not functional. So we have a full teardown and reassembly for you today. Some of the things you'll need in no particular order. First is a pentalobe. Also a Phillips, you can get these bits and the drivers from iFixit, but you'll need either one of a couple of, well, you'll need a tri-wing or Y000 bit. You'll need either some sort of flathead or a standoff. So this is a flathead, this works, not the best. If you do this often, I'd highly suggest investing in one of their toolkits that has a standoff bit. I use, at least for this one, 3 different tweezers. We need an opening tool. We need a couple of things that are, I'd say necessary, but slightly optional. A magnetic mat, or you can use packing tape, just something to place your screws on so they don't get moved around. You'll also need an adhesive gasket for the new housing. You'll also need some sort of adhesive. Now I'm going to be using this phone for myself. I'm not that picky, but if you are a paying customer, there are adhesive gaskets that you can, if you bought some sort of kit, it might even come with it. If you have a screen, for instance, or a housing, a lot of the times there's going to be a adhesive for the new battery. They're helpful because they're cut specifically for this device, or just, once again, if you're not that picky, just some sort of double-sided tape and some sort of heat source. We're gonna have to heat up some of the flex cables, having a good memory, and a lot of patience. And I use, for the battery tabs, to remove the battery tabs, I use 91 or 99. I use 99, but you can use 91% rubbing alcohol, just a couple of drops. They come out way smoother. I have a couple of videos on my channel just going in detail where I do one without alcohol, one with alcohol. You can watch those if you like. Yeah, so this is, as I mentioned, the casing on this particular device is split open, so we have to do a housing replacement. There's a couple of options here. One is, well, in my opinion, the easiest is just to get a bare housing. You can buy housings that have parts that are pre-assembled. Like, for instance, this is an 8 Plus. Obviously the parts are going to look different, but the charging port, speaker, Taptic engine, all the flexes are in this. If you're not that savvy, it might be worth spending a few extra dollars to not have to transfer over a bunch of the components. I will mention that it depends on the vendor and depends on the person who installed the parts. I used to order those several years ago, and relatively common. Some of the flex cables wouldn't align properly, or buttons wouldn't click right. Just something to be mindful of. So you might have to, don't expect it to be perfect. You might have to tweak some of their work, but it will certainly save you the process of transferring basically everything from one phone to the other. So decide for yourself. But this is the repair. I'm doing a bare housing, screen replacement. So let's get started. So the first thing you want to do is turn off the device. And we take our pentalobe. Take those, take those two out. Take our opening tool. Now this one is way too easy because the casing is split at the bottom. But if this is yours, typically I would start anywhere along the bottom. You really don't want to stick the opening tool in too far. Typically what I do is I use a twisting motion. So something else that you can do is you just want to push up. It just makes the process of removing the screen, you don't need to use as much force. Like one way is to literally just drag. I find this to be much less invasive. You're much less likely to slip and potentially damage something inside, which obviously that's no good. Don't do that. All of these initial, so the retaining plate covering the battery, as well as the 6 screws are all tri-wing. I mentioned earlier, but I use a Y000 from iFixit. If anyone wonders, they're not paying me to say that, at least not yet. Been using them for quite some time. I was using another bit a long time ago, and I just ended up with so many stripped screws. I will say, I mean, I used to hate with a passion the iPhone 7 series, just because that's the one they instituted the tri-wing for, and it used to be a nightmare. And then the second I got my iFixit bit, the clouds parted, the angels started singing. I'm joking, but it made those repairs significantly better. The number of stripped screws I had went down dramatically. It almost never happens anymore. So if you do this even remotely often, it's worth getting one of those toolkits from iFixit that has I don't know if they have a Y000, but worth investing money into. Now, I completely forgot about this, but if you did get a kit from iFixit, it comes with a spudger, nylon spudger. You can use tweezers, but I always advise not. As a nylon is going to be significantly less likely to accidentally damage or gouge part of the board. So your 3 flexes are right here. Typically, at least the safest space to pry up is almost always in the corners, or you can use the flat side of your spudger. Should have led with that. Next we have the rear camera. There are 1, 2, 3, 4 tri-wing screws. Once again, I try to avoid using this plate. Lifts up relatively easy. Then I come in with my tweezers. There's this little piece there. Just lift it up. Now we have our rear camera. Use the flat end of your spudger. Usually I use that motion, if you can't tell. Last flex is right here. Now we need to remove the camera. Once again, use the flat side of your spudger. Just lift up on the, it's just sort of a outer metal housing. So I pry up on that side. Now, depending on how long you anticipate this taking, even if you only expect it to take, I don't know, an hour or so, I'd still suggest taking your camera, rear camera, front camera. Now I have these little baggies that I'm going to use, but it's not a bad idea to tuck them away in just some sort of bag that will keep dust off. The last thing that you want to have to do is reassemble everything, and in the however long, I don't know, sometimes I don't do this all in one stretch. So if I'm going to pick this up in the morning, usually I put the cameras in a bag. So we have our front camera. Same deal. I'll do the same with the main logic board, as you want to avoid any dust getting in the connectors. I mean, it just as easily can be solved by blowing it out before you reinstall everything, but it's almost always easier just to avoid it in the first place. So once again, use the flat side of your spudger, lift up. Now there is this new addition on the 11 Pro series. So that's up and away. We now have 1, 2, and 3 take your bracket, move it aside. Now we move on to the charging port. We're going to run into quite a few tri-wings. So one for the Taptic engine, these 4, these 2, and these 2 are Phillips. So we'll start by knocking out. See, this is where having either some sort of tape or just something to keep track of your screws, because typically the charging port, at least lately, has been done in layers or sections. Some of them are different sizes, different heights. And the last thing you want to do is mix them up. Lift up on our plate, take it away. Come in with our Phillips. 1, 2. Now, use your pointed end Lift up on the Taptic engine, speaker. Now once again, I prefer using a standoff, but you just as easily can use a, well, maybe not just as easily. The flatheads tend to slip when you, mainly just when you're reinstalling, so when you're tightening everything. But we have a couple standoffs. I'll do it in sections. So those two. So there is a little bit of adhesive. There's a gasket that lines up with the speaker. So that's what's putting up the fight when you remove it. Just lift up at a 90-degree angle. The Taptic engine comes out. No fuss. Then we have two more flexes. Use the flat end of your spudger. Right there. Then we have, now there's a little bit of adhesive and foam sort of which is about right here on it. You can sort of just wiggle it out of place. There also is, when you reinstall it, I mean, honestly, what you might end up doing, depending on how you remove it, is you might end up moving, get this in focus, this little piece right here hooks in approximately right here. So if you bend it, I mean, you can just bend it back in place. You didn't damage it irreparably. So then we have one, two, and three standoff. Set that bit aside. On this one, they have two tri-wings sort of tucked away over here. Nothing on that side. Now you don't have to do it in this order, but I'm going to remove the battery. Like I said at the beginning, I use 1 or 2 drops of alcohol, but I typically do it in this order where I will So once you have almost like spaghetti, I'll sort of spiral, roll up my tweezers around the adhesive. Sorry, I keep putting this out of focus. Really just 1 or 2 drops of adhesive, of alcohol. Now, this is exactly what you want to avoid, but half of it ripped on me, which is why it helps having this still connected. Typically, I find it's easiest to always pull from the base of the adhesive as close to the battery. I mean, you don't want to be pulling way out here. You want to be which is why I used my finger to keep pressure on it. Then we have 2 more and a third, I guess, and technically 4th. Now, this bit up here is incredibly short. This one is a little bit longer. So, now I usually wait to take out the battery tab up here until the front camera is removed, just as you want to avoid as much. Well, the front camera's not replaceable, so you want to avoid getting any sort of dust or debris or adhesive or alcohol on it. Then we have our last 2. Now, typically I'll just sever that. Once again, I roll. Take a couple of drops. And that is not faring too well. So I'll do the same thing on this side. These battery tabs don't want to come out. There we go. It's not it's not a bad idea to, at this point, apply essentially lubrication. It does come out much easier, even though it doesn't seem like it. Voila. So just as a visual, battery adhesive covered pretty much this area, this whole area right here, and then right here. Take your battery, set it aside. Now we get to move on to removing the charging port. Now we have a Phillips. Sometimes they don't want to come out. So we have Phillips 1, Phillips 2. Now this one is a little bit harder to get to. Apparently I lied. So this isn't entirely necessary, but it helps. I come in with a bit of heat. So this is a very hot, powerful air gun, but you just as easily can use a hair dryer. You'll just have to give it more time to warm up. Then I use the flat side of my spudger. So what you want to watch out for is there is a bit of adhesive. So here we go. This thing comes out pretty easily, but this is your front mic, that little gold box right there. So use the pointed side of your spudger and just sort of dig it in ever so slightly. And then it comes out, at which point we can lift up. If the adhesive comes off with it, great. If not, no big deal. As you can see, it sort of just stays right here. I'm not going to reuse this. It's not all that necessary. I mean, basically the phone isn't water. It's meant to be part of the water-resistant seal. Once we've opened it up, there's no sort of going back. So that's the point of no return. And we take our charging port. Now, ever since they started implementing this board on here, whatever you do, don't damage it. These things are unnecessarily expensive. Most charging ports are like $5 to $10. Those are, at least right now, as the timing of this video, filming of this video, are in the, I think it was like $50 or $60 range for them. It's ridiculous. Now, some of your housings might already have these. If they don't, I use pointed tweezers, and you have to dig out these plastic they're not really held in there all that hard. They do have a forcing function, so they are supposed to line up right, but I'll go over that during the reinstall. Now the next part are the mesh. That keeps out dirt, dust. They are held in with a bit of adhesive. So this is where my other pair of curved tweezers come in. And really, you just want to poke it in the holes on one side or the other. I use two, gently. See, I'm not doing this on camera, I'm sorry. So you lift up, bam, they come out. If they're bent out of shape, you can bend them back pretty easily. There's two. Now same thing on the other side. The 10S is one of my least favorite. They have one of these where it's just one hole, and it's such a pain to reinstall. But as long as it's like these 1x2s are much more straightforward. Now, for the sake of, now we will mention this. These things right here, your little mesh, if you sneeze, they will blow away. So I'd suggest reinstalling these basically now, which is what I'm going to do. So take your new housing. Now, there's no forcing function with these. They go in either way. It's the plastic pieces that have a forcing function, or that only are supposed to go in one way. feel like this is a bit redundant, but all of these three are exactly the same size. So if we mix one up, put one in the wrong place, who cares? Make sure they're sitting flush at the bottom. Now, I don't know if I'll be able to get this on camera, but you'll notice that that's the flat part, and then you can see sort of a little, can you? You can see a little ridge right in between the two holes. So the flat part faces down, the ridge faces up, and you'll notice that it's slotted. So flat part here, and then it's angled basically this way, sort of. So we want the higher part to be towards the back. So I may, yeah, these, and then sort of I just use my nail, just push it in. Now we can already see that our mesh here wants to come out. Drop it back into place. Same thing here. Yeah, these are a pain. Once you get them in, it's almost easier to just use your nails, if you have any nails, or just push down with your pliers, tweezers. Typically don't have enough grabbing strength to sort of push them in, so I kind of just wedge it in on one side and then push down. Voila. It's not a bad idea to clean up your space, especially if we don't want to scratch up our new housing. So, next. We take our Phillips 1 and 2. Now typically what I do is I'll only screw it in just a little bit. And I'll show you why in just a sec. So these are our two longer Phillips. So it's not an uncommon thing. See, there's tape over this. Let me get rid of this. guess I should just do the whole thing. Why? All right, here we go. Tape is off. Now we take our charging port. So that plugs in right, it aligns properly. Then we can come in and tighten them. The last thing you want to do is tighten it. I've done this many times in the past, which is why I do this, which is where it's not tightened properly, or I don't align it properly, and it wants to go in at a slight angle, or it doesn't line up properly, and then you find this out after you're closing the phone, so you have to undo a bunch of stuff. Not fun. So always better to do it now, where you basically have 2 screws to undo if anything goes wrong. So next we have this piece. So we just drop that in, and we come back with our standoff. Once again, you can use a flathead, just not that fun. Now, for whatever reason you mixed up, you'll notice because there's 3 standoffs. There are 2 sort of longer. This is the shorter one. So shorter, longer, or this is the shortest between those 2, or 3. Just kind of push that in place. And we can't forget about our tri-wings, 1 and 2. Speaker has 2 Phillips, long, short. Whoops, I'm getting ahead of myself. Right there. You can snap your flex down. Same thing with our Taptic engine. Take our 2 standoffs. We have a longer tri-wing. So I have to undo this just a turn because it's not aligned properly. Next, we take our bracket. It's really not that difficult. We sort of just have to nudge this little piece right here on this side. I sort of come at it from the right. You'll notice it should stay in place pretty easy. At least for the time being, we're not going to be able to tighten our remaining tri-wings or this retaining plate. So we'll just leave it there. That long little plastic piece, I just get rid of it. Now, something you do want to get to before too late is we have these brackets that hold in the screen. Phillips. And then there's two of them on this side. Now, there might have been some adhesive that was left from that little plastic piece we took off. I mean, literally just scrape it, it comes right off. Now, I put these in sooner than later, or at a bare minimum. The one on the right. Now, you do want to make sure that the brackets are facing up. You should see these little two things. You should see those right there. Make sure that they open upwards. I have put them in the wrong way, and then the screen just does not want to slide in properly, which just means taking stuff out. Don't do that. Well, we're gonna have to get to this sooner or later. So, if you have a sim removal tool, use it. I just use pointed tweezers. Pop this out. There is a little post right here that is going to make it more difficult than necessary to remove the logic board. Come back, we have our, getting ahead of myself. So, we have flex cable 1, and 2. Okay, this doesn't want to work. There, fingernail. Now we're good. We have 3 standoff. 1, 2, 3. Your board lifts right out. Once again, I'm going with my baggy method for the time being. And at this point, take your sim, whatever that thing is, post, drop it in that. Drop it in this hole right here. Now we can move on to the wireless coil, volume, buttons, mute switch. I'm going to take a break. I'll be right back. So, we have up next we have a couple Phillips. Four to be precise. Then we have tri-wing. So there's 3 tri-wing, 1, 2, 3. Take our bracket. There's also 2 tri-wing here and here. So, I lied. There's a Phillips and a tri-wing. And another tri-wing right here. Then we move on to our power button. Now, part of that same flex are 3 Oh my God. No. I'm being dramatic. There we go. Then we have this little plate and 2 tri-wings. Now this just comes right off. There's a piece of rubber underneath there. Just pop it right out. This is the rear mic, which sits right there. We also have the flash. So you got to tilt up the phone because we have a tri-wing right here. This bracket here slots in right there. So this has to come out and up. Just like that. This little tab right here has a little bit of foam on it, so it might resist you a little bit. Just pull it right out. You can't mess it up. Come in with your pointed end of your spudger. There's a Phillips right here. Now this is where heat is going to come in handy, because all of this, 1, 2, these two, your microphone, the flash, you can just sort of pop right out. But this is all held in with adhesive. You can do it cold, but the likelihood of damaging goes up quite a bit. Obviously, we'd rather avoid that. So we take our, usually I start here. I start over here, move along. Once you get there, literally just nudge the flash right out. Now this is where the microphone comes in handy. Pointed end, lift right up. That's our rear mic power flash. Take your flex, set it aside. Now this one is going to be a little bit trickier. Typically this is where the flat end of your spudger comes in. Now, as you can see, it goes all the way up here. But typically, it's just held in with just a little bit of adhesive. So you can kind of just nudge it out of place. Bam, bam. Now, yours might have this, mine doesn't, but there's this alignment plastic piece that needs to go right here. And while I'm noticing this, we have this piece right here. And that's it. So we take our, I'd suggest going back in with some heat. Makes the process a lot easier. Lift up ever so slightly. Set that aside. Now we're left with our rear mic mesh. Just comes right out. And that's it. Good Lord. Sorry, I'm not doing a very good job doing this. Sorry, I'm a perfectionist, and I want it to go in just right. Sometimes it doesn't. I was being a bit dramatic because there is a, this is the underside of that notch. So it should help align it a little bit better. Now, we need to remove the buttons. There are these little hangers here. I don't know what you want to call them. I call them hangers. Now, this is one of the very, very few things that I don't actually bother to reuse. I just knock them out of place. Great, there they are. Then you come with your tweezers. This bracket pivots up and to the left. Literally just take this out, set it aside. So you'll notice the bracket right here, right there, and down. So it goes that way, that way. Take our tweezers, pop out our buttons. So you always start from the left. So this piece right here, rotates down. Sometimes you have to push the button in slightly because this doesn't want to click into place. Once it does, you should have movement, or else your power button won't work. Or side button, excuse me. That's what they call it now. So once we have that, I come in with my now, if I remember correctly, I'm getting ahead of myself again. That goes in, then this goes in. Typically, a rule of thumb with a power button, or volume buttons, or side buttons, as they're called, is I align one, all right, sorry, I tighten almost all the way. Then you tighten the other. Because if you tighten one all the way, sometimes the bracket doesn't align. You have to loosen it and then retighten. Click it a couple of times, make sure it works. This works. And we come in with here with our rear mic. It has a tendency to want to move. So we start with our rubber gasket, or this rubber piece right here. Then our bracket. Tri-wing 1 and 2. Now, in no particular order, just need to make sure that our brackets here you want to make sure that all these holes align, or it's just going to be a pain in the neck when you start. It's going to be an unnecessary amount of work. So usually I start with making sure that they align, then pressing firmly. So we need to make sure that all of those holes line up. Then we come in. Usually I start with the top. So we have our tri-wing, which goes right here. And then our pentalobe over here. Now we can nudge our flash in place. Then we need to take our flex, move this aside, get it in place. Now this one is a Phillips. If it doesn't line up, typically you just guide it in with your screwdriver. My experience, it doesn't put up that much of a fight. So now that we have that, we have our bracket, this little piece. So we want it to go into this little slit right here. Two tri-wings. One, the wider one. You might want to push down. The bracket doesn't always want to lay in place just right. So sort of nudge that piece in. Tighten it down. And that's that. And we have our 3 tri-wings that go here, here, and here. And before we drop our main logic board in, we need to transfer over the wireless charging coil, the buttons, and this entire flex right here. So we first start up by heating up the charging coil. There's really not a whole lot of adhesive around the center. It's all around the perimeter of it, so right here. Once again, you might need to use more, or at least heat for longer if you don't have, I mean, there are heat guns, you know, like those paint stripping guns that contractors have. I have one in my garage. That works, and don't go too crazy on it. I mean, at this point, all the sensitive stuff, the board is out, so it's not that big of a deal. If you put too much heat into it, then you just buy a new flex. That's the worst case scenario. And once you get here, usually you can just lift up. Now you want to be, at this point, you want to be sure not to, because there's adhesive in the corners. You can see it right here. Right here, 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 and there. Now, if you accidentally use too much force, you can rip off this tiny flex, essentially rendering the whole thing useless. So don't do that. Then you need to come, so I use my flat end of the spudger there. Then I use my pointed end. The technique I have is I twist. So I twist towards me. And you can either use the spudger, take our flex, set it aside, take our tweezers, get rid of these stupid hangers, just pull on them. You're not going to mess up. You're not going to damage the button. Remember, they rotate this way, just like that. Just like that. Pop our buttons out. This thing is bare. Nothing left. Now, these aren't. But if you, I don't know, go camping a lot, or your phone is really dirty, or I don't know, you're a contractor, or in the military, or I don't know, you're just, I don't know, your phone is dirty. You might want to clean out your buttons. I've seen it before where they don't have full movement or as much movement because they're so clogged with dust and debris. Same thing with your switch. Make sure to, if necessary, you can clean up your switch if it doesn't have full movement up and down. As the saying goes, when it's open, or I guess when it's out, you know, while you're in there, that's the saying, if you're a mechanic. While you're in there, might as well fix more than one problem. So then we come in with our brackets. Like I said, we start from the left. It helps to push the button in with your finger, rotate it. It should slot in there, just like that. If it's not, make sure you're pushing in the button all the way, just like that. So, next, Come back. I always start with the mute switch. So this particular bracket is held in with four Phillips. I start by going, you don't have to do this, but I typically start by all the way right. Then we need to take this piece, this bracket needs to fit in right here. You want to make sure that this bracket isn't all the way tight when you do that, because I have accidentally stripped away the nipple on, which is this little black piece right there, right in the dead center of that button. I've accidentally stripped it away. When you rotate it counterclockwise to align it in place. So make sure this is a little bit loose. Then basically you want the volume button bracket to be on the inside. So the volume bracket is here. The volume bracket is here. Then the mute switch bracket is right next to it, just like this. If that wasn't obvious from the video. If you don't tighten these enough, I have seen this before, where these buttons will, or the screws will unthread over time, and then all of a sudden volume up doesn't work or volume down doesn't work. So as you can see and possibly hear, we have movement. Now, in my opinion, it is worth putting adhesive in for this. If you have any double-sided tape, I'd suggest using it. You really don't need much. Come in along the side. Now we have a handy alignment right there. And I'm off by just a little bit. It's not a bad idea to connect your flex first, just like this. Then we come back, then we come in with our board. Pretty much only going to fit one way. Just like that. Take our standoff bit. in no particular order. One, two, and three. SIM tray. If your SIM doesn't slot in right, it's not a bad idea to unthread either one of these screws or all three of them. Make sure it's aligned properly. You can sort of wiggle it back and forth. Make sure the SIM slots in and out properly. So yeah, and then retighten. Go from there. Connect our flexes. One and two. Now, we need to connect or to reinstall the rest of our screws up top. We have this little plastic little dude right there. Goes up in the corner. Our L-shaped bracket goes on top. And the rest of these three screws up here are tri-wing. And it doesn't always go in right the first time. Isn't that lovely? Alright, let's try this again. Oh my god. There we go. There's that. Last but not least, see, some of these have a tendency to come out of place. So now, battery adhesive. Now, if you have the, there are these, I don't really feel like, let me see if I can dig one up. It's just battery adhesive. Yeah, I don't have one, at least on hand, but they're convenient. Just like these, you basically just lay it on, peel it off, and then it's the same style of pull tab adhesive. Now this is a bit backwards, but usually I start with making sure the battery aligns properly. Once it does, it'll come through. Like I said, I try to align this first, because if you lay this down, if you lay your battery down and the flexes aren't aligned properly, when it comes time to align them, it can just be a huge pain in the neck. So I usually try to get the flexes in first, then I'll press down, and the last thing that you want to connect is the battery when you're actually connecting stuff. So make sure to disconnect the battery here. Then we can come back, sort of line our flex just right. I find it easiest to snap the top one in first. Usually these wider flexes, it's not a bad, or I suggest not pressing in the dead center, because it can sometimes not connect properly on either end, and then maybe one particular part doesn't work. Usually I suggest pressing right to left or left to right. It hooks in much better. Then we have this long bracket and 3 tri-wings. So now that we're done with that, we can come back in with our charging port bracket. Now all 4 of these are tri-wing. And that's that for the time being. Now, you may have noticed I have discolored lenses. That's my vendor's way of being helpful. Make sure that you get these out, or else it will interfere with your ability to take pictures, and that's no good. I mean, one way is just to wiggle them around. I prefer this route, as I have accidentally scratched some of them have pull tabs and they're nice and they come right out. These, not so much. So I use double-sided tape, I pull it out. If you're forced to use something sharp, I would suggest, or I would suggest avoiding metal, because like I said, you can scratch the underside of the lens, and well, let's avoid doing that. I would suggest using a pointed spudger. And in general, it's nice to be as unintrusive as possible. You're much less likely to damage something inside of the phone using a nylon spudger, even if it's a pointed nylon spudger, than I'm comparing directly tweezers. I mean, you're going to do less damage with this. You're going to do less damage with this than this. So, as a general rule. Now, camera. I lift up the longest, snap, snap that in, just slots right in. You really don't need to give it too much. Then we have our Face ID module. You want to make sure that these are aligned properly. Or else so I start with, in order, we have 1, 2, and 3. So in a reverse L shape, top, bottom, bottom left. Usually I start, you sort of have to. And come in, nudge those in place. So we have those in place. You have this long bracket which goes over, and it sort of bunches up your Face ID flexes. Now your camera retaining bracket has tabs. Good Lord. Doing this one-handed. Right here and here. They slot in, literally just 90-degree angle. Bam, just like that. We have 4 tri-wing. Well, the rest of them are tri-wing after this. LCD battery. Now, this is by no means necessary if you're doing this, as the phone is not water resistant. But we do have our... It does make a big difference. The screen has a tendency to tap against the frame if you don't have a gasket in place or enough of a gasket in place. So it's sort of an exact science, but usually I start with one corner Make sure that it aligns along the sides. And I didn't do a very good job there. There we go. Now, the nicer ones have a two-layer design where you peel this off and then you're left with this gasket here. Now, last but not least, we need to remove the ear speaker. So we have Philips Tri-Wing. Remove that. Tri-Wing is last. Now you can use a, now in this one, I always suggest using heat, mainly for the rear microphone. Not rear, I'm sorry, front microphone, your Siri / speakerphone / voice dictation microphone, and also the proximity sensor. If you damage those, it's not the end of the world, but this is your ambient light sensor right here, front microphone, proximity sensor. Make sure there's no glass on your proximity or ambient light sensor, or it'll make installation difficult, as things will not want to lay flat. I usually slot the proximity sensor in first. Some of these things are so small, it's difficult for me to get this on camera because my hand's just covered entirely. So the Tri-Wing goes in the upper, well, the Tri-Wing won't fit in either one of these, so that shouldn't be a problem. Just like that. Now, last but not least, make sure you don't remove the, if you've done this step, make sure just leave the gasket in place until the last step. Make sure your battery is disconnected. Now So I usually install one of these before installing the flex. Now this one is longer, just like the charging port flex. So usually I go bottom to top. Make sure it sits flush. out of habit, I turn the device on, test it before reinstalling our remaining flexes. Hey, look at that. Touchscreen works. Now, as we literally, not just figuratively, interacted with everything on the device, it's at this point not a bad idea to make sure that everything works. So as we can see, volume up, volume down, mute switch. Obviously the touchscreen works as it did not before. The flash so all three would appear to work. Telescope, wide angle, ultra wide. Test, 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 test. Test, test, test. So that's the rear microphone. Test, test, test. Test, test. That's the front microphone. Also, it tests the loudspeaker. It's worth connecting to a charger. Go to voice memos. Microphone works. We're all set. Last but not least, we remove our gaskets. Now, as you can already see, it wants to come out of place. Try to push it back down with the flat into your spudger. Then you come over, grab the last one. Last but not least, there we go. Now, we need to get 1, 2, 3. Typically I start with the upper right, then pivot to upper left. Make sure that none of the flexes are sitting at an on angle. Snap it in place. If all of a sudden your touchscreen stopped working, maybe you pinch something, redo that last step, and that's it. Now all we need is our 2 pentalobes. Some of the pentalobes on the 10 and 11 series have a tendency to tighten up. Sometimes it's basically what I do is I just pinch the screen down ever so slightly. Because you don't want to strip the screw, because sometimes, I mean, they'll sit out at an on angle, or sometimes you strip it right as it gets in, and then you won't be able to remove it if you need to repair the phone next. So if that happens, don't go gung-ho on it. Just pinch the screen, makes it easier to drop into place. There we go. If you have any comments, leave them below. Make sure to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.